Japan for you.
Oh hey kids, well, look who's back with the milk and cigarettes. So, before we shove our swords deep into Japan and the samurai and all that, you might be wondering why I'm in this state that I'm in now. Well... So, yeah, for all you who don't know, I'm actually the original guy, if there even is such a thing, who started that trend of salmonella ripoffs about a year back. And ever since I got a minor case of channel death, things have been a little on the downward. But you know what? Fuck it. I ain't gonna let that stop me from talking about the Meiji Restoration and the Satsuma Rebellion. So hey kids, do you like samurai? Do you like all those old movies with the fancy fist fighting and shiny swords being whipped out of their slick sheaths? Oh, I bet you sure do. But have you ever wondered just what happened to the samurai? And why they aren't roaming around Japan enforcing their order anymore?
Mr. Drilla, didn't they all die? Hey, no fucking spoilers, pal!
Well, it all started long ago, way before Japan became a nation centered on exploiting and profiting off of people's emotional vulnerabilities, and instead focused on the good old days of preserving and exploiting their peasant population's naivety instead. During an era of Japanese isolationism during the Edo period. So at this point in time, Japan just kinda said fuck it, and locked themselves in their house for 264 years. And sure, this essentially meant that they were left with medieval technology. But hey, things were generally nice and quiet and peaceful. Was good, bitches!
Oh jeez, fuck!
So now, we all know that America is a pretty responsible country, because when literally anything happens on this God-given green earth, they are usually responsible for it. So in this case, with poor Japany boy, they literally sent a man named Commodore Matthew Perry with a bunch of ships over to rouse the dormant Japan from her solemn slumber and wake her up to see the beauties of the modern world. Sup, dipshits?
What? What the hell was that for?
Nah, no worries. They're just blanks. Just celebrating the 4th of July, you know?
What the fuck are you doing here?
Just seeing if this restaurant is open for lunch, you know?
What are you talking about? We don't trade with—
Shh. You better check out your little gift you got there.
Wait, why is this a white flag?
Oh, nothing. Just thought you might need it someday. Especially if you accidentally leaked the wrong person's lizard, right? Right. And then the Americans just left with that fucking mic drop of diplomacy.
Wow, my little boy is all grown up now.
So, yeah, America just went up to a country that had been isolated for centuries and threatened them with all-out war unless they started to sell them their shit. Yeah, that's right, sell them. So at that point, Japan is like, well, shit. These katanas are great for murdering our own citizens, but they're gonna do Captain Jack fuck about Machine Gun Kelly over there. I know, why don't we just modernize? If we had guns and factories and shit, we could totally kick their asses. I mean, come on, we're Nippon, for fuck's sake. So the government, after a few quick little wars and skirmishes, under the new Emperor Meiji, set about the modernization process, going about conscripting soldiers, building factories, phasing out the old Japanese caste system, and establishing a modern government over the old feudal system. But unfortunately, after seeing all of this sudden modernization befall their prized nation, the samurai of Japan became deeply disturbed. You see, they felt like their honor was being betrayed. For over 1,000 years, they had devoted their entire existence to maintaining their upstanding nature and upholding sacred Japanese traditions. And now, their country was throwing it all away and hastily selling it out to the foreigner. Nah, I'm just kidding. That's some Mystic East bullshito. The samurai were really like, oh, come on. What's up with all of this relative equality nonsense? What happened to the good old days of killing random people on the street to see if our blades are still sharp? Yeah, remember what I said about Japan shutting out the rest of the world to keep themselves peaceful? Well, this was less of an act of goodwill and more for the government and horribly corrupt institutions like the samurai to just keep their power and impose their, quite honestly, tyrannical rules on the people unopposed. So naturally, this, combined with a rising middle class in Japan, led to a large number of localized samurai rebellions and civil wars. But Japan quickly put them down. But after all of that was said and done, Japan was really starting starting to get worried about their biggest samurai sect, the Satsuma domain, a de facto independent region located on the southern tip of Kyushu Island, which was led by Saigo Takamori, a big old mountain of a man who was a prominent samurai and former sumo wrestler. Now, keep in mind, Saigo was an incredibly complicated figure. On one hand, he was an incredibly nationalistic and traditional samurai. He felt that Japan should keep the old ways, but at the same time, he wanted Japan to modernize for its own good. He held a position in the government for a while and was even a founding shareholder of the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Corporation, back when it made steel instead of cars. And when he stepped away from politics, he just retired to the Satsuma region and tried to live out his days farming, hunting, and spending time with his grandchildren. Heck, he even started up a bunch of military academies in the area just to provide disaffected samurai with some form of employment. On the other hand, though, he was an incredibly nationalistic and traditional samurai, meaning that he was still basically a warlord who had very xenophobic views, famously being one of the biggest supporters of the Expel the Barbarians movement, which called for the expulsion of all foreigners from the country after good old Matty Perry threatened to blow their ass apart unless they opened it up so new men could enter. And naturally, this made the Japanese government more than a bit nervous, since they basically had a big rogue province chock full of rebels and ne'er-do-wells. So at that point, the Japanese government put down the little boys and sent some police officers to interrogate the samurai leadership. But little did they know, the samurai had some big brain plays up their sleeves, because after the police officers arrived, the samurai then straight up captured and tortured the cops until they confessed what the samurai wanted to hear, that the police were actually spies preparing for an invasion of the Satsuma domain, and the samurai then used that as an excuse to start a rebellion of their own. Alrighty then, the Japanese government was totally boned, right? With a huge providence of their greatest and most experienced warriors revolting, just what was the infant 5,000-year-old Japanese government, now defended by an army of mostly peasant conscripts, gonna do against a millennia-old class of warriors? Well, a lot, actually. Because remember what I said earlier about the Japanese being completely cut off from the rest of the world for almost 3 centuries? Well, I lied. Sort of. You see, while Japan had expelled or just straight up murdered all foreigners and closed off the country centuries earlier, they actually did maintain some incredibly limited trade with the orange water monsters of the world. The Dutch. With Dutch books on science, medicine, and technology becoming mainstream in Japan over 50 years before good old Matty Perry came knocking. So basically, when the Japanese government officially started to modernize, they modernized fast, and they already won some of the aforementioned major civil wars and conflicts by using modern military techniques against some of their foes using more traditional Japanese warfare. So now that the stage was set, the battle began. So initially, the Japanese government thought that Saigo Takamori would bunker down and defend Satsuma, but instead he was like, I ain't afraid of no farm boys. So he just led his samurai down on a thunder run straight up to the middle of Kyushu, planning to cross the straits and officially march on to Tokyo, with Saigo hoping to raise support among local samurai groups on the way over. Because officially, this wasn't a rebellion, according to Saigo. No, this was merely a patriotic protest, and he wasn't marching to the capital to overthrow the government. Instead, he was just gonna liberate the emperor from the corrupt government officials who were manipulating him. Ha! 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 However, even though he tried to do this, a government garrison at Kumamoto Castle stood in the way of the Satsuma rebels, manned by all the dirty, stinky peasants in the area, which Saigo of course laid his big, tumultuous siege into. But eventually, thanks to the castle's excellent endurance, they were able to hold out until the government sent over 40,000 reinforcements, which quickly drove off the sedacious samurai. And after a few more skirmishes, in July of that year, the Japanese managed to finally encircle Saigo's men. But then the Saigo crew somehow managed to break out by slipping through the heavy fog in the area, albeit with many casualties. So a little while later, the government then encircled the rebels again, and to prevent them from breaking out, gave the order to, and I quote, not move to help neighboring units in the case of an assault, but to fire indiscriminately into the general area in hopes of shooting down the samurai. And after the Japanese army somehow survived that self-assault, and after a bit more fighting and running on Saigo's part, the samurai were really boned. I mean, at this point, they had like 40 people left. So, seeking an honorable death for themselves, they regrouped at Parentheses Mountain and led one last suicide charge down the slope, and thus marked the end of the samurai. Well, sorta. Because you see, most of the samurai class were actually pretty cool with all this modernization stuff, considering it a necessary step forward for Japan. And as a result of their better education and military skills, they got higher paying jobs and better ranks in the newfound bureaucracy. So in other words, while their class was officially abolished, they still found a way to be better than most people. Until 1945, that is. So the next time your estrogen-filled weeaboo little brother says that he wants to be a samurai, tell him to throw those isekai mangas and dollar store katana away, and to find fulfillment in the sweet, sweet wonders of bureaucratic employment. It's for his own good, I promise. But anyways, I'm Samuel Drella, and Japanese culture peaked in the 90s.